I am with Rena Bauman, an organic intelligence coach. She's actually the one who introduced me to organic intelligence many years ago. And she was my organic intelligence practitioner. I was her client, and actually, I'm still her client currently, as necessary. I've been working with her for a decade or longer. And she has agreed to be interviewed by me. I look forward to it. Thank you, Rena.
Yeah, super happy to be here. And it's, it's really heartwarming to like do this with you and have this conversation with you. Because yes, we connected many, many years ago, probably not fully understanding how our paths would align in all kinds of ways. And the different connections we actually had, when we first started, I didn't share with you some of the connections I had
Oh,
through other people with you. I probably never have shared those, but there's all these ways that there's these interesting intersections. So that makes it fun in that way. Um, and then,
yeah.
yeah, the whole organic intelligence background I started in, with a lot of different modalities and found my way to organic intelligence specifically. And as we worked together, I just kept bringing the tools in, and then they interested you and you started doing your own training. So, yeah, super cool.
Yeah, the purpose of this interview overall is to learn more about you and to have a free association conversation in the style of organic intelligence and see what arises. Um, so many possible directions. What do you do now? Or if you feel like it, what did you do and what led you here? Either way or both.
Sure. So, I started with my own process, right? My own healing process that took me through trainings in all kinds of body work modalities. And so I have a background with that. I used to do a lot of hands-on work with people and still do sometimes. But I was really interested, even in all that training, I was most interested in, as I described it then, I would describe it differently now, but at that time, I would be like, the body is this conduit for emotional healing. And I wanted to be able to use the body or help with the, help the body go in a way that allows for greater healing, greater well-being. So there is that. And so in the process of that, I just felt like I continued to need more and more training. So I did a lot of different trainings in ways of, what would be now traditionally called somatic psychotherapy, and the ways the somatic world, and soma means body. So somatic is just all these different therapies that deal with the body, and the melding of that, of understanding how, psychotherapeutically, how, the psyche, I guess you can call it, functions, and really trying to see how can we not exclude certain parts of ourselves in our healing processes. Like how can we cast the biggest net and I, in so many different ways. What I do now, I see oftentimes ways that I bring information from and perspective, really, from so many different avenues that I've gone down over the years. And so they all show up in terms of being able to serve people to become what I would say the best versions of themselves, right? To be able to find that way into kind of becoming more aware of and knowing who they are and who they want to be, as well as any, helping to get rid of any impediments to that. So obstacles, blocks, and anything that keeps them from being able to become, the best versions of themselves, their own heroes, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
their own heroes.
right. Or heroines, if you
Interesting.
want to
Yeah.
be.
Well, I wasn't going opinioning that specifically. Um, you mentioned somatic psychotherapy. Would you be willing to explain briefly what you take that to mean to a general audience who may not be familiar with it?
Right. So there's right now, if there's, I mean, there's a whole field of study that is where people who work with the body in so many different ways, because the body this is a form, the body is a form in a sense, and it holds ways of being just in muscular structure and how our bones have moved, the cranial nerves, what they're doing in the system, the entire nervous system, like all of these things are a form. And in that form, we act out of that form. So we take on patterns, and those patterns can influence the available options for spontaneous action. Or they may sometimes, those forms can limit the available options for spontaneous action. So let me think of an example like for that.
Nice.
There may be ways, I'll just give a real concrete example. Let's say that somewhere along the line, something happened on the right side of your body. So a ball came in and hit you, or you got somehow a sudden shock to the right side of your body. One might find, due to the bracing patterns that happen, that one avoids things on their right side in some way or another, or doesn't perceive things on their right side. I was doing a game today, actually, where somebody walks. I stand on one foot. Actually, it's part of a balancing exercise. The person's throwing me a ball, but they're walking around me as they're throwing the ball. And I could tell that when it came to a certain place in my visual field, I lost the ability to see the ball with clarity. And I would tend to drop it. Like I wouldn't be able to catch the ball as it was coming onto the right side. That tells me that there's something in the bodily form that is missing some information on that right side, which when it comes to life choices, I might have a tendency to always go left when the circumstance might be better served if I went right. Right. There might be ways that I don't notice things coming towards me, so I can't duck or avoid them. Right. So I don't have that spontaneous action. Could be that I have a partner, and on the partner on the right side, I just don't emotionally notice nuances of what they're expressing. Whereas if they're on my left side, I do notice more, right? These are all subtle things that would be examples of the spontaneous ability to react, respond, act that might be lost because of something as it relates to my form. Right. So that's the somatic piece of it. But you can hear me talk about how it's moving into the psychotherapy piece, right? Like I talked about relationally, I might not be as sensitive to somebody if they're sitting in the right side of my field. I might be just have a tendency to be more ignoring of them. Right. And that could seem like a character defect or something that needs to be explored in psychotherapy per se, but maybe it has a root in the biology instead.
Current behaviors, current patterns having a root in the biology as opposed to just in the psychology. Is that, am I getting you?
That's would be a way I would say it. I often think about a pithy way I'll say it is, to heal your psychology, you have to heal your biology. And so often people, and this is not a knock in psychotherapy. I've spent, decades in psychotherapy and still enjoy the occasional interaction with people who know me well, because there's always learning and growth to be had. But there's a way that sometimes people can go through lots of psychotherapy and they do not have the changes that come from the inside out. They may have a lot of insight. There may be a lot of cognition. There may be an understanding of one's history. They may watch themselves do things over and over and over again and wonder why, or they know why now. But for the body to actually spontaneously choose, and by body, I mean all of it. That includes your mind, right? Your brain, your mind is an extension of your brain. And so your brain is part of your body. So all of this becomes a biological underpinning, like that we want to look at going to the core, to the very foundation of our being. And as a person who has a body, and without this body, I don't exist. Then it kind of behooves me to really get a sense or work on shifting the body so that how I express myself, how we might talk about in terms of character, psychology, and so forth, can actually have the ability to, and I keep using this phrase, spontaneously, without thought. Change just happens.
Things just happens.
Right.
And in somatic psychotherapy, the approach you most gravitate to organic intelligence. That's your primary, the primary modality within that field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I would, because I see what organic intelligence offers, and I was definitely attracted to it for a reason. Because there's an approach, a methodology that has an approach that understands the body as well as everything that comes from it, every element of ourselves, the things that we see in our head, the movies in our head, and the audio narration in our head, the what we call emotions, right, or affect, the way that we sense things in our body, like, you know, some people talk about interoception, which would be feeling what's happening on the inside, like your heart beating faster or your stomach feeling kind of funky. But there's an infinite number of body sensations one can feel. All of that makes up all of us, right? That's part of who we are. So organic intelligence has a unique way of understanding that in terms of, and here's the fancy idea, in terms of complex systems or dynamical systems. And complex systems, dynamical systems is a theory about how life happens, how biology happens, from microorganisms all the way up to the most complex of beings, which right now, as far as we know, is human beings. And so understanding that from the perspective of how complex systems works, organic intelligence is the only methodology and approach that I know of that treats the system, the mind body, and I don't even like that duality, because it's just a system, which is why I like that word, all of it as a system that operates in the same way all other systems operate in this universe, to the best of our understanding. And so it doesn't matter now, all of any other trainings I do, anything I learn, anything I add to help me understand people and how they work, and really how growth best happens. All of that's within the framework of organic intelligence, because that provides the paradigm that I think is most, to my knowledge at this point, is most accurate.
Do you have an elevator speech on it?
On organic intelligence?
Yeah, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. But do you have one or near one? And the question is, what is organic intelligence? Can you give us an answer?
Right. So to me, organic intelligence is it's a methodology, it's an approach to growth and healing that borrows from complex systems theories, also positive psychology, but is mostly seeing that the system, when certain conditions are met in the system is going to auto-organize. So in complex systems, we see that when conditions happen, the system itself will always move towards growth and survival, or away from that, which is not going to help it grow and survive. There's a small caveat to that, because as rational thinking beings, we can interrupt and interrupt that process and thwart that process. But when we learn to take the brakes off of so much of our meaning channel, the system will automatically oscillate in the way it needs to do in terms of, excitation, activation, movements up, like all of that, as well as deactivation, de-excitation, if that's not even a word, but in the way that our inhale and our exhale is as natural to being human. And it's pretty difficult, if not near impossible, to force yourself not to be able to breathe, to interrupt it to that degree. That the inhale and the exhale is automatic. We have some voluntary control over it. We can influence it, but whether we breathe, that's automatic. And the inhale happens until there's all these chemical shifts that happen between CO2 and oxygen in our system. When that shift happens, then the body automatically exhales. And then after that exhale, we got another shift in the CO2 oxygen balance, and the inhale automatically happens. That's auto-organization. That's auto-oscillation between this movement of what's more excitatory and what's more calming and comes down in terms of the level of excitement. Our neurons work on that. Our brain works on that. Every cell of our body is, it contracts, relax, contract, relax. Everything in our system is operating on that bipolar oscillatory system. And so organic intelligence harnesses that for the growth process, knowing that if we can get rid of the impediments, oftentimes in what organic intelligence, we talk about what's wrong attention. That's one of the impediments. If we can, sometimes there's other impediments that come from, say, birth trauma or early life that are very physiological, biochemistry based. If we can remove those, then and then we can create some other conditions that allow for this positive movement towards what's better, then the system will automatically move its way step by step by step by step by step through life in the way that is going to be most optimum for our well-being.
The agenda, you mentioned, the agenda of the biology is to survive, to grow, and to auto-organize. And an example of auto-organization, of automatic process in favor of well-being is breathing. Are you able to elaborate a bit on what auto-organization is? That's a technical concept in organic intelligence. What is it, and how does it relate to survival and growth? Survival and growth are more familiar concepts in living phenomena. So could you speak to auto-organization a bit?
So again, auto-organization it's somewhat become a technical term because it's distinguished from self-organization or just no organization of a system. And that's systems are either evolving or devolving. They're all either growing in some way and moving towards their betterment, or they're in some way moving towards a de-evolutionary state. And the like when I think of, say, like bacterium, right, the amoebas, like these very simple life forms, right, they will go, be just kind of floating around in their little whatever soup they are in, and if they encounter something that is okay for them, they're going to move towards it. And if they encounter something that's not okay for them, they automatically move away from that. Now, if we think of our own bodies are doing this on a biochemical basis, like gazillions of times every nanosecond, right? Because every single system within our biology has to be maintained in certain narrow parameters, right? So our hormones and acid alkaline balance and all the other, the enzymes and that create processes, all of that stuff has to be operating in very specific parameters, which is, when we think about it, is extraordinary. The system is doing most of that without you having to think about it. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Right. So, and this is a long way around your question, right? So my system is, I'm a type 1 diabetic. My pancreas does not make insulin. Insulin is a master hormone. It sets off a huge cascade of other hormones. And so when that's off, lots of other things don't really work to the best of their ability, right? And I have to then, with my own mind, exogenously inject myself with insulin. And fortunately, we have instruments now with algorithms that help do that. So I don't have to do as much of the work, but it still requires me to do like a lot of work. And
Yeah.
I can never do that work sufficiently to the level of what my body would be able to do if it had a pancreas producing insulin. Like it's so automatic, and it's an automatic process that's happening every second as the system goes along, right? Obviously, having insulin promotes life. Not having insulin leads to death, right? So it's either evolving or it's devolving.
Mm.
And to do that through conscious awareness of what's happening, I can't do it. There's no way I can do it at the level that my body does automatically. So I have to use self-organization, right? And it requires these strategies all the time that are akin to self-organization. I'm being very conscious. I'm making it happen. Is that good for me? Yes. That's a great thing that leads to a much better life than would otherwise happen if I didn't have that. And that's not the same as my system automatically doing everything and auto-organizing.
So self-organization is the use of effort to manage yourself and to move forward and to identify, seek, and achieve values. I'm importing some of my own content in there, but I'm thinking I'm trying to track you correctly. And then auto-organization would be the degree to which the biology can automatically handle that. Yeah.
When the conditions are right.
When the conditions are right.
Yep.
And organic intelligence has a view about what conditions enable your biology to take care of you, enable auto-organization so that self-organization is less necessary. Is that
Correct? Right. And yet it also has the idea that self-organization is necessary at a part of our growth and healing, and may often at other times, right? It's not a linear one-way system, right? It's much more of this kind of the circular type system. So there may be times where the system is on what in organic intelligence we call it a trait level, the kind of the meta level is auto-organizing, and yet life can throw you a curveball that requires you to self-organize, right? So no matter what I do in life, barring someday a stem cell transplant that produces insulin on its own in my pancreas, barring that, I will always have to use self-control for that element. So there may be, like, the overall arching system could be auto-organizing, as the body does in many other functions, but there may be self-organization that has to happen so that disorganization or chaos doesn't ensue, right? Like, so the system doesn't devolve, right?
Yes.
So
Okay.
I'm using a very biological thing just to help people understand what that is, but that also happens in terms of how we view people, like how we engage in life in many different ways, right? And so on that level, this is where it starts looking like, well, we can fix our psychology. And to some degree, that is true. We can exercise self-control. We can inhibit certain things. We can have more agency in certain ways. We can learn different ways of behaving that we never realized were options to us because we learned conditioned patterns that, we didn't know about. And yet, if we have that insight from the top down, it often comes to a point where it meets the biology's condition that sometimes won't allow the new action to take place. Right?
Yeah.
So,
using effort can interfere with auto-organization.
right. So it's very different. It's very different if I teach, okay, so say having a boundary with somebody, like somebody's not treating you real well, and oh, I don't have good boundaries, and that may or may not be true, right? That actual statement. But you feel like I need to say no, and I don't say no, and I don't know how to say no. And matter of fact, I almost never say no. right? That's a pattern. That's a conditioning. And you can effort really hard, right? To go, okay, so when somebody does this, I can say no, and I'm going to say no. And you know, kind of try to, the phrase is coming, gird your loins. Yeah, you can kind of just, you know, lift yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Like kind of figure out how to make yourself be able to say no in certain situations. Problem is, every situation that comes up, you can't imagine ahead of time. And so it's very difficult spontaneously for, if something is in alignment with what's going to help you grow, you say yes to it. And if something's not in alignment with that or your values and interests, then you can easily, did I say this wrong? You say no to that which isn't and say yes to that which is, but it happens without you knowing. So clients come to me all the time because I do all these things with them on a body-based level. And then the client will go, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know it, but this circumstance happened up and I just automatically did what I needed to do. It just flew out of my mouth. I didn't even try. I didn't even think ahead of time. It's just the person says, you know, the shopkeeper, you know, says, we're not going to help you this way. And the person's just like, well, then, you know, they just have a response. And then they get what they needed. And that's the difference between auto-organization and self-organization.
Auto-organization furnishes spontaneous, adaptive responses in the moment, factoring in the complexity of the moment, and that's often superior to one size fits all rigid boundaries ahead of time, trying to predict every possible, and then it's not as exacting and spontaneous and easy as auto-organization.
Yeah.
I'm getting that.
Yeah. Yeah. Love the way you put that. That's yeah.
So you said there are certain conditions that enable auto-organization. Can we pull the curtain over that, and can you reveal what the conditions are that enable auto-organization?
So the biggest let me, can I back up a second? I'm gonna back up just a second. So one of the thing that I work with most with people is around what people call the emotion. I'll tend to call it an affect or a physiology of shame. And if we look back, if we pull the curtain back on all these different challenges that people have in life, at their root, shame is always there. Right? So when we talk about the biology as being fundamental and foundational, I'm beginning to see more and more how shame is fundamental to the experience and one of the fundamental affects, right?
Okay.
So the reason I say that, right, is because one of the challenges that happens is the propensity that shame has to draw us into our internal interiority, into our internal sense of being. And that internal draw is most often dominated by all of this conditioning we've had that helps us be very attuned to whatever might not be in our best interest, right? So in organic intelligence, the little pithy way we call it is what's wrong attention. And the what's wrong attention is the natural tendency and the natural habitat or the natural habit of the system wanting to pull away from that which is noxious or toxic in some way or deleterious in some way. And that pulling away from that, we want to survive. We want to keep going. And so we have all these moments where we learn how to pull away, pull away, pull away, pull away. And then that becomes a conditioned part of ourselves, right? That avoidance of pain in essence, right? The result of that is we develop these like neural pathways that will always head in a certain direction. If if you ring the bell A, there's B happens or C happens or D happens, right? Like it's just a pathway of things that happen. And we see that where you have a certain body sensation and you go, oh no, that's a problem. That must mean that I'm really sick. Like, what am I going to do about this? And oh, whenever I go to doctors, they're not really helpful. Okay. Oh, I have a thought now. So that body sensation leads to a thought.
Yeah.
And then you said the doctors are never helpful. And suddenly like the feeling is like you just defeat, helplessness, right? And so then you have the affect that comes with that. And then the physiology of that of just kind of like rolled in shoulders and head down. And then you're like, no, I can't be that way. So you're like, I'm going to get angry, right? And so then the body's like, okay, I'm going to take care of myself. And so then all this anger comes up, right? And with that, a whole set of physiology. So there's all these steps that can happen in our system. Point to my head. It's not just in your mind. It's the whole system. These things that can happen that cause this patterning. And that patterning doesn't allow for spontaneous action. So our job is, how do we undo that patterning? How do we help that conditioning or that rut not be as strong so that we have another option?
And you've said that you've observed that a lot of the time, or almost always, the patterning includes a lot of shame patterning, which is one of
Yes.
the reasons you're specializing in shame. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Could you quickly just tell us what shame is?
Okay.
At least,
That's great.
I mean, even
Right.
though you can Google it, but still, from your
Right.
perspective and in your
Well,
theory, yeah.
yeah, you can Google it and you will not find a single definition or singular definition, right? You'll see
Yeah.
many, and just to pin, still haven't answered your question about the initial conditions, so we'll get back to that. But so shame is again. So I did a deep dive, like to start off with what is shame. Then you got to go, well, what is an emotion? And then okay, what is an emotion? Then you have to go, well, what is the self and what makes that? So it's a much more complicated question than that it seems on the face of it, right? But shame is, in my understanding to date, right, is there. Even though we're complex systems that are constantly adjusting to environment, there are things that are like reflexes that we come into this world with. We are born with. Our system is created for that. So obviously there's something that once a sperm and an egg connect, there's a whole series of things that happens that grows a human being. Like it's quite phenomenal, right? How is that happening? There's some kind of and I like to think of it in terms of, firmware, right? It's like your computer is the hardware, but the moment from the first day you turn that on, there's a whole system of programs that are embedded in that hardware so that you can even turn the machine on. And it's that firmware that I believe that people come in with. And this is slightly different than, say, like basic emotional theory. But there is something about the body, and this is the word, and Tompkins was a person who really distinguished and delineated between affect, feelings, and emotions. So for him, and I'm lean in this direction, that there's something in the biology that happens in response to something else that is innate, that is something innate to the degree that as this fetus grows, once you come into this world, you've got this firmware, a certain level of it, right? And so for Tompkins, that's affect. And he lists certain affects that he sees consistently, even in infants, right? So the earliest of children, we can show when the system is not allowed, there's an impediment to it being able to move in the direction it wanted to do in terms of positive affect, that then it will do this head down, gaze averted, shoulders slumping, like it's like the wind comes out of the sail. So I call that the shame physiology, right? It's a certain physiological response that's nearly reflexive. And it's reflexive towards, so in organic intelligence, we talk a lot about the upside of the hill. So this activation and then this deactivation. And so on the activation channel, we have the unpleasant side of that, which is fight and flight. But we also have the pleasant side of that activation, which is curiosity, interest, excitement. And then on the other side, when that hits its maximum capacity in that moment, then the system wants to go in a place of joy, enjoyment, and contentment. Right. And just be able to, there's some ease there. And it comes down and it keeps going up and down and up and down this oscillatory way. Shame is, from my perspective, and you won't see this anywhere on the internet if you Google it, but from my perspective, shame is the interruption, the premature interruption of that system trying to come up and hit its own automatic threshold, or come down and hit its own automatic threshold on the bottom. Either way, if it doesn't get to finish those, either side of those, then the physiology turns to shame. It's a shame physiology that comes from the premature interruption or inability to hit a threshold.
The shame physiology sets in if the organism cannot intensify up to the level that would catalyze auto-organization, if it cannot reach that level, or if it reaches that level or higher too much, but cannot come down from that level, either or, then the shame physiology kicks in. Is that right?
Yeah. Or if it's coming down, say, you're, just, you've just had sex and you had a great experience, you had a great orgasm, and you're just hanging out in the bliss of that. And then all of a sudden your partner just like gets up and walks away. And you're like, wait, where'd you go? Right. That is, you were just enjoying that. You were just enjoying the feeling of that. The whole system was just having a chance to really relish in that. And then suddenly it got interrupted. You didn't get to finish your complete enjoyment where you felt like, oh, I'm done. I'm sufficient. Like it's good. Right. So it can happen on both sides, where you can't hit that point where you feel like, oh, I'm done with my curiosity here. I've been as curious as I've wanted to be. I've looked up the information, and now I'm going to go for a walk. Right. And so on either side of that process of the organizing system, if it's interrupted when you're not ready for it to be interrupted, and it can be interrupted from the outside. And I gave the example of like your partner getting up out of bed and, you're like, where'd he or she go? Or it can happen from the inside, from your own conditioning. Right. And so you're enjoying something, and all of a sudden you hear this voice of a former, teacher or coach saying you're lazy, and suddenly you're not allowed to enjoy your rest. Right. And that's going to trigger shame.
The interruption of a natural, enjoyable deactivation can set in motion the shame physiology.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. And you specialize in working with the shame physiology to move it into the initial conditions that can restore auto-organization. Is that right?
That would be a great way of saying it.
Okay.
Yep.
How many initial conditions are there? And what are they?
Yeah, well, organic intelligence talks really about two specifically for one's own biology, although it talks about others in terms of a therapeutic relationship or a context like that. But the most common or the first one that we want to help restore is this connection to the external environment. So I was mentioning before that one of the things shame does, and a lot of our conditioning does, is cause us to go internal. And we're swimming around in the internal milieu of our thoughts and feelings and body sensations and images and narrations and that kind of thing. And those are not always really helpful to us, right? And we have varying levels or varying degrees to which that's unhelpful for us. Sometimes it is helpful. Sometimes we have conditioning that's is good because we're still alive. So if you're here listening to this message, you have a lot of things that are happening on an auto-organization level that is actually sufficient to keep you breathing, right? But for well-being in life, to be able to know who you are, what your values are, to be able to pursue them without impediments. That would be one of the factors that needs to happen, is this coming back into the external environment. Now, orientation from an organic intelligence perspective is happening all the time. It's part of what makes you you. Right. So in the beginning, I talked about image and sensation and the thoughts, meaning, the affect or emotions. But there's another one that organic intelligence talks about, and that's orientation. And orientation is embedded in this idea of who you are, because it's part of your system that is always trying to do two things: make sure you're safe and find resources, including human connection. So orientation is always out there going, okay, is there anything here that's causing me danger and I need to react to, yes or no? Right? And it's always looking for where's food, where's a fire, or what can build a fire, housing, and then and even on the basic level, like my people, my group, my tribe, my those people who can then help me keep safe, be safe should danger come in when you're young and can't defend yourself. As you get older, it still serves in that way, that other people become resources for us, right? And so orientation is a way of getting your attention into the external environment so it can be aware of what's already there and available for you.
Okay, so for people with shame physiology, the attention is often absorbed internally and often unpleasantly. And the first initial condition, a major step towards moving through shame or melting the shame, is to be able to restore the attention's connection to the outer environment, to assess for safety, to assess for what values there are, and to enable social connection, which are important movements away from the interior pull of shame. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Because all of those things are going to be, right? So we said before, the bipolar nature of the system is to move away from or avoid that which is noxious, toxic, harmful in some way, right? So the system's always looking for that, and to move towards that which is, beneficial, supportive, and going to continue to enhance life. And so orientation is the part of our system that does that, which is very different than the way orientation is being talked about in the trauma-based kind of world. They're teaching it as a practice, as a thing to do, as a something to somehow make yourself better. So part of that self-organization phase. And organic intelligence teaches it as this is something the brain is already doing, the mind's already doing, and what we are only doing is helping to bring it a little more to the forefront, right? So that it's not so that this internal milieu of what's wrong is not what dominates us and limits us.
I see. So orientation is not find with effort 5 things to look at. It's more what is already seen and lean it into a bit to kind of prime that automatic orientation,
right?
Get the attention away from the interior that's fueled by the shame physiology, right?
Right. Now, it could be true that inviting somebody to go look in your environment and find 5 things that you like might help them pull their attention more towards the external environment. And then they might notice something that's really pleasant, like, my attention is being drawn to the dried flowers sitting on my desk, and therefore, oh, now my attention's there. But that's not going to create auto organization. And it's just as possible that as I start to take my attention out, if my system is primed for what's wrong, it might just notice, the thing that I don't like the dog that's yapping next door, right? And so that I just as likely, and sometimes until we help prime the system, am automatically and more likely to, okay, bring your attention out and name 5 things you like in your environment, and you'd be like, oh, I really like that's this flower, and it's this really beautiful red color. Oh, that's the red color that so and so who dumped me had, and when they were wearing the shoes that they were wearing in the day that they walked out on me, right? Like, it's just as easy to flip over into the what's wrong attention, because it's a self-efforted thing, as opposed to, in a sense, opening up the field of awareness to what's already there, that's either enjoyable or supportive or is for your well-being.
What's already easy to orient to, not what can I do to fight the pull of the shame physiology.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Um, how about the second initial condition?
Yeah. So the second is, in organic intelligence, is the idea of orientation to pleasure, is the way that it is worded. And it's the idea, and their orientation is being used slightly differently, right? So the first word of orientation is a process of our system automatically to be looking for those 2 elements of safety and connection, or resources. And then the orientation to pleasure that is being used is a turning towards, right? Like a movement towards, a bringing one's attention towards. So there's a little bit more of a slightly efforted process. And so in organic intelligence, both orientation and orientation to pleasure is stacked within this, the self-efforting or the self-control part of being, but it's in order to rest, WREST, like to pull one's attention away from all of the chaos and the disorder and the thoughts and images and feelings and all those things that just keep cycling through in an uncontrolled way, or in a hyper controlled way, such that one just continues to do things that is not in their best interest over and over and over again. So orientation is when we're trying to move our attention, and on the level of free will, that is one of the biggest ways that we have free will, is we can direct our attention. We can choose where we want to move our thinking, and we can choose where we want to, what we want to pay attention to. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like pay attention to something and then my mind takes me over here and I have to kind of bring it back, and I'm paying attention and my mind, takes me somewhere else. And this is one of the, like concentration practice in meditation circles, is trying to stabilize that attention where you're choosing to put it, right? So we all have that ability to do that. We just don't exercise it very much. Right? We tend to just allow our thinking and our thoughts and our sensations and our, like it runs us unconsciously.
So if people aren't, the second initial condition is the ability to direct attention towards pleasure. And if people, what are people directing their attention to if they're not directing their attention to pleasure?
Right. And so, and I think that's, it's interesting as we're talking, I think that the directing of the attention is the first initial condition, to be able to direct attention and to strengthen that capacity.
Yeah.
And then we're strengthening the capacity in the orientation to that, which is not what's wrong attention. So the opposite of that we've labeled as pleasure. And again, these definitions, different people have different definitions for these words, but pleasure is basically that affect which says all is well.
The first condition, orientation, enables control over attention, directed attention. And then what we want to direct attention to, according to the second condition, as you say, is what feels better.
Yes.
That's
And
the way through the shame physiology.
right.
Yeah.
And that can be what feels better in terms of curiosity, interest, and excitement, or
Curiosity,
what feels
interest, and excitement.
better in terms of joy, enjoyment, contentment. So at first, we work in very small levels of thresholds of connecting up with, yeah, unless someone is in an experience of the most severe trauma, and most of us, that's not what we're working with, and that's not where we are. Everybody has some kind of access to something they like or don't like. Now, that might be fuzzy, that might not be very clear. There might be movement towards the awareness of that, and then the shame comes in. You're not allowed to have things you like or don't like, so that all can happen. But we all have things we like or don't like. And so part of what we do is we just start bringing that to the fore. That's orientation to pleasure, the very basics of standing on my mat that has an anti-fatigue element to it feels better than standing on the concrete floor. I like that feeling under my feet, right? There's a like element to that. And so we may start out with the most neutral of pleasures. Right? And that's better. It might be just like, oh, the wind's blowing, so my attention's being drawn out there. I'm just curious about that. Right. And that curiosity is, oh, that's just, there is some wind chimes. Nice. Oh, I like that. Right. And then we just let that come down. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm back to a state of being at ease. It's fairly neutral kinds of things.
Yeah,
Right?
like neutral, for many people, subtle and much lower intensity pleasure than they're used to.
Right.
Just to restore staying oriented while
Right.
touching into pleasure or feeling better or what you like.
Yes.
Yeah. So we got orientation and orientation to pleasure being the keys to moving through the shame physiology to restore cycles of intensification and de-intensification in the biology, cycles that reach certain intensity levels that catalyze auto-organization. And auto-organization refers to the biology's ability to automatically take care of you so that you don't have to spend as much effort, which is self-organization. That's
right. Right.
You.
So when you, I want to take note, when you say it requires less effort to have the system begin to function in this auto-organizing way, that frees up all of this energy that's been bound up in the effortfulness of life, and it frees it up for meaningful living, better connections relationally, being able to think about even what are my values and what are the things that I want to move towards, what are the things I want to have in my life, and what are the things I want to enjoy in my life and spend my energies on having in my life, like all of that. And then movement towards like the result of receiving all of that, being able to live according to your values, is you get to feel happy. Right. And along with that, like a sense of productivity, like I'm doing something that feels valuable to myself, to my connections and my relationships in the world. And you begin to have much more energy available for that. So once the system auto-organizes, all this energy becomes released to be able to do what is, there's this drawing or inclination or movement towards doing, including the ability to even think about that.
Auto-organization, moving through shame physiology to restore auto-organization, to unlock energy that can then be directed to thinking about what I want, what my values are, how to pursue them, having the energy to pursue them, achieving them, and then being happy.
Yes.
In meaningful living.
Yeah. Because essentially we're not amoebas.
We're not amoebas.
right? So the you know the micro and macro animal kingdom gets to do that entirely by instinct, and humans don't get to do that by instinct. So when we have all this energy bound up in this condition, these conditioned responses that come from, you know, our experiences and things that we've learned to do to survive, less than optimal, you know, circumstances, then we are not able to live from that rational side of our being that allows us to think about things and to
Mm.
make decisions about things. So we are less likely to exercise our free will. So when you're under the dominance of the conditioning, you have less free will. Or I should say, you have less ability to access and live from that free will. That might be a better way of saying it.
Auto organization exponentially increases the range of free will and unlocks the power of rationality, I'm hearing.
That's would be, yes, what I'm saying.
What are your offerings? How do you help people? What services do you offer? How do people seek your assistance?
So right now, I mostly work with people, or I'm, you know, moving in the direction increasingly working with people in online group, small group environments. And part of undoing shame is having to deal with all of our learned conditioning from our families to our school systems and our peers to, you know, all the different groups we've ever been involved in through life, right? And so by working in small groups, and by that I mean, you know, generally 6, no more than 8 people, but I generally try to keep around 6 at this point. We're able to work through there's opportunities for in a way together, in a way that's supportive, right, to be able to undo the physiology, the automaticity of the physiology of shame. And so one of the things that I do is, you know, I say this, the simple way of saying is I'm working to de-shame shame, because we all have it. It's a natural experience. Like there's all kinds of oscillations happening, and some of them we get to hit threshold and some of them we don't. That's going to create shame. The more people realize what shame really is and what it's doing and what it for your biology and the benefit actually of it, then the chronic shame begins to melt. So there's a difference between chronic shame as a trait versus episodes of shame, which are just states. Right. And so these traits, which are all kind of, you know, smashed together, we get to create some differentiation in that and start seeing these things as states of shame. Because a big part of chronic shame is the anticipation of shame, and the anticipation of shame states causes us to preemptively, in anticipation, do things that will keep the shame physiology running, as opposed to having a new experience that will be different. So we slowly help people have new experiences by establishing these initial conditions in very shame-free ways, right? And we do that in an online environment. It's a hybrid, so it's both a group class, but then there's individual sessions as well. As well as all the other resources and audios and videos and whatnot that go with that. And it's a 6-month program, and nobody's going to be done with chronic shame in 6 months, right? Like, I shouldn't say no one. There are people who, like, boom, like something shifts in them. But for most of us, it takes a little longer. So I have a level 2 course where we go more in depth on impediments that might be causing you not to get out of the shame physiology, that have nothing to do with you know, learned interpersonal relational problems, right? So this has to do with the cranial nerves, primitive reflexes, developmental movement patterns, that when we can get those back on board, again, from the very base of the physiology, then shame can begin to melt, or impediments that have been keeping shame on board can go away. And then I have a 3rd level class, and that's all around this meaningful living. sense of purpose, understanding where you want to go, what your values are, making choices around them, and supporting that process.
3 levels of classes. The first is 6 months online, hybrid, group, and individual sessions.
Correct.
And to find out more people and to contact you, maybe people can go to your website. Is that the best?
Yeah, that's the best way. Richer Growth. So Richer Growth is RICHER, and then growth, GROWTH, richergrowth.com. And there's information there. I do introductory workshops. And so you can find out about the introductory workshop. You can sign up for my newsletter and get all kinds of information about the classes as they keep developing and as they're offering, because these classes are ongoing offerings, right? So there's 6 people. Once we have 6 people, we start a class. And then as people come in, we wait till we get another 6 people, start another class. And so my newsletter is the best way to find out when those are starting.
Nice. And I'll link to your website down below. You mentioned, did you mention there are benefits to shame? And if you did, could you speak to that a little bit? The benefits to shame?
Yeah. So there's nothing that we come in with in terms of our firmware that is not for our benefit. Right. So it's the system is designed to be able to, have the things that it needs to survive and to avoid the things that will cause its demise. So shame has to be one of those things. Right. So there are certain levels of ways in which shame helps you. I'm trying to think what all to share about this. Shame is going to cause you to turn away from that which is not serving you so that you can find the thing that is. This is just one of the benefits, right? So if you're an infant and you're trying to get your mom's attention and you're like cooing and cawing, and doing eye contact and laughing and smiling, and then suddenly, the cell phone rings and mom's not paying attention to you anymore. Right? And so in that moment, if you try to keep getting mom's attention, that's a waste of energy, because she's nowhere to be found. And so your system, it didn't get to hit its threshold. And so the shame physiology causes you to all of a sudden look away. And then you have the opportunity to go, oh, block, or shiny object, right? And so then you can have curiosity, interest, and excitement again. Instead of trying to keep hitting a threshold where a threshold can't be met, you have shame. The physiology is designed to shift your attention so that you can go after, they have the potential in an oriented state to be able to find something else.
If I'm understanding you, you're suggesting that shame, the benefit of shame is that it can be a compass that directs you towards orientation and orientation to pleasure, the initial conditions for auto organization.
Correct.
So within the shame physiology is impulse towards the initial conditions.
Yes.
And you help people access the compass within the shame.
Yes, exactly.
Sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah. It's and that's just one of the benefits, but I think that's the primary benefit. And that, again, there's this distinction between, because we don't have the language yet properly, I think there's a distinction between a state or an episode of shame and chronic shame, right? So chronic shame, which is a trait where you are in the state of constantly anticipating shame, so you're not oriented to pleasure, you're not self-organizing, that's not a healthy or beneficial thing. But an episode of it is serving a purpose.
Episodic shame tends to be more wholesome, beneficial.
Yes, has the potential for that.
And the shame you help people work through or de-shame is primarily the chronic shame?
So I am helping people begin to differentiate, right? To differentiate between what's chronic shame and what's an episodic or a state of shame, right? I'm helping them, so in an effort to de-shame shame, I'm just helping them get that initial differentiation on board, because then they can see a moment of shame, and instead of seeing that as a pattern that's always happening, because it's not always happening, but in chronic shame, you feel like it's always happening, right? And you live as if it's always happening. As you get that differentiation, you get to go, oh, this was a moment when I was really interested in something. So I asked the teacher a question, and the teacher either didn't see my hand and ignored me, right? So a person with a chronic shame would see that as reinforcing. See, why am I not visible? Why do I not, raise my hand more? Why don't I speak up more? Like all these different things you'll start to tell yourself about, as opposed to it's like, oh, I had an interest. I had a question. And the teacher didn't see my hand. And so, of course, I felt really bad. And that's what happened in the moment. Well, now what? Right? Maybe I'll email the professor or the instructor the question, or maybe I'll talk to one of my classmates, or maybe I'll look it up on my own, right? Like there's all these options that are available to you if you see it as an episode that actually is trying to help you to get in the direction of orientation to pleasure, as opposed to reinforcing the chronic anticipatory state.
You're helping people lift the fog of war over the shame so that they can distinguish chronic versus episodic, what's helpful, what's not, restore the compass of orientation to pleasure. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
I definitely look forward to more conversations with you. Are there is there anything else you'd like to share with me, with the audience, or topics you want to raise here? Pretty open, and whether they're shame related or not, OI or not, organic intelligence or not,
So, I might just name, for the sake of, being, recognizing these layers. So part of organic intelligence, they talk about the individual layer, the family layer, the clan layer, species, planet, cosmos. So shame is not just an individual experience. So oftentimes they come from, the interpersonal bridges, as Kaufman talks about it, in the family context, but that can also happen at the level of the clan or society and those kinds of things. And so there are all kinds of possibilities for shame to arise, and it can happen for individuals as it relates to their relationship to family, others, but also as it relates to where they are in society. So there's these more complex elements around shame, because anytime you can create a comparison between two people, and there is an infinite number of possibilities of that, anytime you have the possibility for a comparison, you have the possibility for shame. And so I see a lot on a societal level of people acting from their chronic shame with some strategies, some really common strategies. And part of what I teach is the common strategies that people use, but they're acting out from that state to try to affect societal change, to try to affect, to make things right in the world. And that, moving from that place is rarely very helpful for one's self or for a larger society. And so it's this whole element of the relationship of the individual to the larger community has its own history. So if you look at the history of shame, how that's done, it's cultural, how it's done from culture to culture is different. What's happening in the current milieu is in zeitgeist is very specific to this. But underneath all of these different things I watch, I can go, oh, that's just that's shame being defended against or being protective. Somebody's trying to protect themselves, and people can bond together along those lines, and all of that are certain strategies that can come into play. And we haven't talked about those. That might be for another conversation.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, it's kind of a teaser you threw out there. And so you're interested primarily in just making that point for now, and then perhaps we'll delve into that in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah, that's another whole
Yeah.
conversation.
Um,
I just wanted to
yeah,
acknowledge it though. So, you know, for listeners that
yeah.
to acknowledge that I don't only see that as an individual quote unquote problem, and that I do recognize that sometimes there are larger scale challenges in the world, and that they have their own way that shame, it drives them in people and all that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
it's just acknowledging that reality.
I worked through a lot of my shame process as an objectivist, a follower of the philosophy of Ayn Rand, um, when I was a professor in a very leftist academia, and also an organic intelligence coach, and the organic intelligence community has a lot of left-leaning people. So I'm throwing out an example of my own process of being who I am, having the convictions and values I have in communities that are often not that friendly to my views. That's These challenges have given me a good opportunity to work through my shame physiology. And definitely the initial conditions of organic intelligence have helped me move through a lot of that. Yeah.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. So good to hear. And I think that's one of the values of organic intelligence is, you know, not only the working through a shame, but being able to come to a sense of, oh, who is the self? Right, like who am I at my core? What's myself? And that includes, you know, my values and you know, the ways I want to choose to live and whatnot,
Mm,
and to be okay with that. Because, you know, one of the common elements of shame is feeling like you're an alien,
mm.
and that somehow you're participating in a larger culture or a subculture that you're just an alien in. You don't belong. And it's a very common reason people feel shame. They have this idea that they're outside the windows looking in to everybody else having a good time, or they somehow feel separated or excluded. And you know, lots of people feel that for lots of different reasons, right? And so being able to work through you know, the different thresholds so that shame doesn't have such a grip on you, you get much more freedom to being able to, like, in essence, to be who you are, if you want to use that phrase.
Much more freedom to fight for freedom,
Yeah.
in my case. Um, Anything else you would like to share on anything?
Yeah. I'm super, you know, it's so fun to be able to just riff and
Oh,
talk and see what comes up. And it's been super fun to hear your rephrasing of things. And so I know I said a lot, and you know, we've just scratched the surface, but hopefully that will increase people's interest in knowing
cool.
more. Whether that be about organic intelligence in general. And, you know, if they want to know more about that, that's organicintelligence.org. Or in, you know, the kind of courses I do that's very niche in some ways. And yet it's not niche because, like I said earlier, shame physiology underscores just about every other affective system. Actually, some of the earlier writers say it's an amplifier of any of these others. So shame is often an amplifier of the what's wrong attention. And
Yeah.
so, you know, if we're struggling with that, it's because shame is there. And so if we can take that off, it helps the what's wrong attention die down quite a bit. And then it's easier to orient to pleasure.
Tips for the listener: practice initial conditions, or orient to pleasure to the extent possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always suspect of tips.
Yeah.
And part of that is because you know, I don't think we've in any way like given a full understanding of what orientation is and how to be in a state of orientation as opposed to doing it. I don't think we've really given credit or, you know, due exploration of what orientation to pleasure is. So I'm a little loath to go just do those
Oh.
things. And
Hmm.
I would say, if anything, to remember that all humans experience shame. And more people experience shame more than you, a listener, might realize. So we have a tendency to think everybody else feels this way, or no, everybody else feels happy, but I'm in a state of horrible shame. Like nobody else feels like I feel. And I know from my own experience, it was that like everybody else can be happy, and why can't I be happy? And then I worked through all my shame, and a lot of what I teach are things that I used on myself just through trial and feedback. And then I all of a sudden discovered like most people aren't happy, right? And now that I feel really happy, now I feel like the odd person out, right? So it really helps people to remember at the very least, you are not alone, right? This is not an experience that only you feel, and others are living their life like, you know, happy-go-lucky.
Okay.
That there is a way out of this. There are gentle ways. It does not require digging through your history. It does not require trying to get all these reparative experiences, although when those come, that's great. It does not involve, trying to change your thoughts through, various cognitive methods. If I could just change my thoughts, everything would be better. It's not that. We want to help shame, the chronic shame, begin to melt little by little, while by building up the things that allow that melting to happen. And that is utterly possible. You just said that you worked through a lot of yours. I too am a walking testimony to what it was like to live in a nonstop state of shame that made it so I barely lived life, and to be in a state of feeling like, ranging on blissful at times, but certainly happy. And so if anything, I want to throw out that that's possible. And so you can get more information at my website on that. There's also Organic Intelligence too, also has some clinical mindfulness talks. So if you go to their website, you can see clinical mindfulness. I have two talks with Steve on clinical mindfulness. You can search through those. And if you want to hear some more, I think they were an hour long talks. You can listen to those.
That's right.
That's right.
Richard, yeah.
Yeah. And then come to a workshop and learn a little more.
richardgrowth.com. That's Rena's website. Also organicintelligence.org. And in the clinical mindfulness lecture series or interview series, there are 2 interviews with Rena around the topic of shame.
Correct.
Rena Bauman, organic intelligence coach, specializes in de-shaming shame, offering 3 tiers of online courses to help work through shame and identify values and move into meaningful living. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been really fun.
It's been really fun.